Hey, I'm Lindsay here at the London Aquarium for the Moshi Monsters 15 million member party. Let's check it out.
Today we're going to be reviewing The Death of Moshi Monsters, one of the best games for children in the 2010s. You may ask why we are talking about a children's game, but I thought it would follow nicely from my Habbo video and I wanted to talk about it, so here we are. Unlike Habbo Hotel, Moshi Monsters in its original form is now deceased, and I thought it would be really interesting to discuss what caused its downfall. Although there wasn't as much controversy in the press towards Moshi Monsters as compared to Habbo Hotel, there are still some controversies and scandals involved in their history, and I thought it'd be exciting to talk about. If you enjoy this kind of videos, I've posted some previously. I'm aiming to upload every 1 to 2 weeks, just depending on my real job schedule. And feel free to hit subscribe. I'd love to hear your opinions. I'd also really love to hear your suggestions for videos if you have any. I've separated this video into separate parts that will be timestamped in the description in case you want to skip or go back, anything like that. So yeah, here we go.
Now, half of all 6 to 12-year-olds in the UK own one. And if you've got young children, you'll probably know all about Moshi Monsters.
Adopt your own online pet. Design its house. Play games. Chat with friends. Create your free pet now at playmoshi.com.
So Moshi Monsters was launched by a man named Michael Acton Smith, a very successful businessman who over the last couple of decades has run some very successful businesses. He is, for example, the co-founder and co-CEO of Calm. He is also the founder of Firebox.com, and more importantly to this video, he is the founder and the chairman of Mind Candy, which is the company that created and launched Moshi Monsters. He launched his first company, Firebox.com, in 1998, and by 2004 he was listed in the Sunday Times Fast Track 100, which is basically a list of the most privately owned successful businesses in the UK. And due to the success of Firebox.com, he managed to secure funding, $10 million, for the launch of Mind Candy, his latest endeavour. He wanted to launch Mind Candy as a children's entertainment company. They started off with a game called Perplex City, which I would argue isn't necessarily children's entertainment, but Perplex City was focused on an alternate reality where there was a fictional city, obviously called Perplex City, and from this city an artifact had been stolen, a cube, and placed somewhere in the real world. So people would solve puzzles and riddles, and the goal was to find the cube in the real world, and if you found the cube you'd win £100,000, the first person to find it anyway. It took 2 years for someone to find the cube, and that was in 2007 in Northamptonshire, UK. Once the cube was found, that was the end of season 1 of Perplex City, and they started working on season 2. However, it was postponed indefinitely and has never been released since then. I think it just wasn't profitable to do that kind of model, although it was a very interesting idea. In 2007, they started working on Moshi Monsters and had like a private server to test things on, and then it became publicly available in 2008. Moshi Monsters is a British-owned web browser game aimed at children aged 6 to 12. Users would pick one of 6 virtual pet monsters. Their names are, I've got them written down because I didn't remember. Katsuma, Poppet, Furry, Zuma, Lovely, and Diavolo. And they would name them and you nurture them and you could change their colours and stuff like that. The game was set in a place called Monstro City, which was basically a little world where you could explore and play mini games and earn rocks, which is basically an in-game currency. And one of the points of the game was that you were trying to collect moshlings, so little collectible versions of the monsters. On May 28th, 2008, 6 weeks after their release, they announced they'd already hit 100,000 members. And over the course of its lifetime, they had over 80 million members worldwide. With the surge of popularity, their initial ability to gain financial success was driven by a membership program very similar to other kids' games of the time, Habbo Hotel, Club Penguin, for example. So membership was relatively affordable. For 1 month, it was $4.99. For 6 months, it was $19.99, and for a year, it was $29.99. The only way to buy membership, I think, originally was to buy gift cards from stores, and then you'd enter the code on the website, and it would give you membership. Let me tell you the benefits of memberships. So, like Club Penguin, with the kind of detective missions, they had a similar sort of thing based on superheroes, and these were episodes. They were called the Super Mosh missions, and they were basically stories of the superhero monsters versus the evil monsters, and there were 26 episodes over 3 seasons, though the 3rd season has been left incomplete since the closure of the game. So 2 complete seasons and half of that. With membership, you'd have access to all of these episodes, whereas if you were a non-member, you could only play episode 1. Members also had access to areas that non-members could go to. So, for example, the port, which was basically an area only for members. You could go there and change your monster's colours. You could earn more rocks, so the currency in the game. Excuse me? Yeah? Members could also obtain event-related moshlings, so the little collectible creatures that non-members could not get, and they could have up to 6 moshlings in their house, which was more than a non-member, and they could also customise their house more significantly and have up to 5 levels of housing. Again, similar to Habbo Hotel, they had a members-only catalogue of furniture they could buy for their houses and items that they could buy. So it was a kind of a simple version of membership, but obviously that was quite profitable for them when they were having an increase of users and thus members. Moshi Monsters' success transcended the game significantly. They did not only earn a significant amount of profit from memberships and ads placed on their website, but they managed to get so many licensing deals. It was insane. They had a lot of commercial success with tangible products too, such as toys, collectibles. I think they had a series of food products. They released games, toys, magazines, DVDs, a music album, DS games, trading cards, and they even released a movie, a feature film. The film was called Moshi Monsters the Movie, and it grossed $2.9 million despite not having an international theatrical release and was straight to DVD. Moshi Monsters was a colossal success in that era of about 2008 to 2012. I found an article in 2013 stating that Mind Candy was estimated to be worth over £200 million. Moshi Monsters remained successful up until about 2013-2014. Unlike other games that were similar, such as Club Penguin and Habbo Hotel, they were being heralded and celebrated for the fact that they had such good software that helped keep children safe, especially in the chatting aspect of the game. I found many articles stating that they were leading the way for child safety, and in 2010 they said that they had an unblemished safety record at that point. So obviously Moshi Monsters was massively successful, a huge hit. So what happened?
And then there's Moshi Monsters. And believe me, if you are over the age of 10, I have no idea what's going on if you're under the age of 10. And there's absolutely no point in me attempting to review the film for that audience. So essentially, if you're a parent and you go to see Moshi Monsters, this is what you're in for.
Hey, when did your get up and go, get up and leave? I didn't have you down as a pessimist.
I'm not. I just think awful things are gonna happen.
Before Moshi Monsters began their official death descent, their first scandal actually happened in 2011. Their first scandal actually pertained to the music they were releasing. At this point in their life, they were really profiting off of licensing deals, off creating extra content for people who were enjoying the game, and so they'd started creating monsters and monster characters that would be singers and release music. And one of these characters was called Lady Goo Goo, who released a song called Moshi Dance. And this character was quite clearly a parody of Lady Gaga. However, she took them to court to prevent them releasing this song, and the judge ruled in her favour. The judge ruled that Mind Candy could no longer promote, advertise, sell, distribute, or otherwise make available to the public the Moshi Dance or any music work or video which is to be performed by the name of Lady Goo Goo or otherwise used by the name of Lady Goo Goo or any variant thereon. Basically, Lady Gaga was claiming that the song Moshi Dance was too similar to her own music and that for children they wouldn't be able to tell the difference, especially considering they were children and not able to distinguish what was a genuine release and what wasn't. I think her fear was that children would listen to Lady Goo Goo's music and then associate Lady Gaga with Moshi Monsters, and that's not what she wanted. So Mind Candy disputed this claim and said that the songs were very clearly different and that it was just parody, but this issue is kind of a moot point now because the judge ruled in Lady Gaga's favour anyway. I actually found a version of the song. There is a version on YouTube that someone bootlegged and uploaded. I'm not going to insert it into this video for obvious reasons, but if you search it up, it will be there for you to look at. I would say that the background music does sound very similar to some of Lady Gaga's work, so I can kind of understand that there are grounds for her to be like, this isn't right. It's much worse than Lady Gaga's music though, so... In 2011, their second scandal was actually in the works, so they wouldn't know this until about 2014 when it all was revealed. So Mind Candy held a competition where children could submit names for an evil group of characters called the Glumps. So basically, children would submit names for these characters based off how they looked, and then the best names would be the real names for the characters in the game. The names of these characters were, this is including but not limited to, Fish Lips, Freak Face, and Pirate Pong. This all seemed fine, and they were incorporated into the supervillain and superhero stories. But then in 2014, a charity named Changing Faces, who support people with disfigurements, called upon Mind Candy to change the names of these characters. Changing Faces argued that all of their evil characters had deformities and also derogatory names attached to them, which would encourage bullying in the real world to children who had disfigurements. They thought that this would encourage the idea of bullying and calling people these names acceptable in the real world. James Partridge, the founder of Changing Faces, said this: "Actions make people or characters evil, not scars, marks, or asymmetric features. Disfigurement has been a lazy shortcut for the entertainment industry to suggest that a character or person is evil." And it's a shame that we still see this kind of thing today, actually, when we look at The Witches. They launched a petition and also sent their stories to many news outlets, asking them and calling for the public to sign the petition so that Mind Candy would change the names of these characters. They also wanted them to remove the descriptions of these characters that were available to the children. Bruiser, for example, is one of the characters with scarred skin. In his description, it says he has scarred skin, which makes him a scary sight. Another character was called Blackjack, and they said he was said to make others quake at the sight of his ugly face, and he had lots of spots, I believe. Changing Faces said that over 1 million people in the UK had facial or bodily disfigurements, and that 9 out of 10 young people with this condition were bullied. Mind Candy did apologise for it, saying that they were very sorry for any offence that had been caused. They also stated that they were surprised that this had happened because they'd been working with Changing Faces to launch a story based off encouraging that no bullying for people with disfigurements, basically, and they'd still release the petition anyway. I guess maybe things weren't happening quickly enough for Changing Faces, considering they'd been working together for a couple of years and these names still existed. James Partridge from Changing Faces said that they were not against Moshi Monsters itself, but to associate facial disfigurement with nastiness legitimises prejudice, which I actually completely agree with, in my opinion. Unlike Habbo Hotel with their very public scandal, I don't think that this incident was the reason that their popularity declined. I'd actually say the decline in popularity started before the incident was even revealed in 2013. There was definitely a shift in what children were interested in and in Hello? What's wrong? There was definitely a shift in what children were interested in and children's entertainment in 2013, and this caused the decline of Moshi Monsters' popularity from that point. For context, in 2012, the company had a turnover of £46.9 million and a net profit of £8.1 million. But in 2013, their revenue dropped to £30.6 million, and they actually had a loss of £2.2 million, which is actually a very significant drop in sales, and they stopped being a profitable business. In 2013, there were only 100 employees working for Moshi Monsters, which was half the amount there were in 2012. I found a news article where Mind Candy had reported that 40% of their profits came from subscriptions to the online web browser game, and the other 60% came from advertisements or licensing deals or toys, games, movies, etc. And it's quite clear that obviously there was a drop in both subscriptions to the game, which obviously then led to children not wanting to buy the merchandise either, so there was a significant drop of profits. And I think this came from the introduction and popularity of mobile gaming, even on the DS, but also then looking at smartphones. It's clear to see that the children that had initially launched them into popularity were now too old for the game, and they hadn't been able to revitalise their community with the new younger generation. In 2014, they aimed to break into the mobile market because obviously this was incredibly popular. They kind of missed the boat on it, but they were like, we can do this, we can revitalise the Moshi Monsters community. So then they released their first mobile app called Moshi Monsters Village, which was actually downloaded 250,000 times in the first 2 weeks, which is quite impressive in my opinion. The game basically allowed you to build your own village and you played mini games. It was quite cute. After Moshi Monsters Village had been announced, they said that this was the first of many new Moshi Monsters style games that they would be releasing. Despite the relative success of the app, their overall popularity was still decreasing, and so were their losses. They actually reported a loss of £14 million in 2014. The company were in a really poor position, and they ended up taking out a loan for 6.5 million at an interest rate of 12%, which is quite extreme, and they agreed that they'd start paying it off in June the next year. At this point, Michael Acton Smith stepped down as the CEO of Mind Candy and became a chair, and he was replaced by a man named Ian Chambers. In 2015, they had another attempt at revitalising the Moshi Monsters community. They wanted to relaunch Moshi Monsters and all of its branding, but this time it would be aimed at a younger audience, aged 4 to 7 years old, instead of the original 6 to 12 years old. At this point, they were focusing on the younger market by focusing their attention on the toys aspect, the apps. The original web browser game was still up and running pretty much as it was, but they were basically trying to revitalise the community and the people who were on it, and increase subscriptions. However, it was at this point in 2015 when they started discussing what would happen when Flash was no longer supported by Adobe. They said they were unsure whether or not they would transfer the web browser game onto a different software such as Unity, because it might not be profitable enough to warrant doing that. Although it seemed like they were hopeful at the time that there would be a revitalisation, so it might be justified to keep the game going in the same way that Habit Hotel has continued to run. There was another issue though for Mind Candy that year. The ASA, which is the UK's Advertising Standards Authority, basically blacklisted Moshi Monsters from advertising. Moshi Monsters and some other children's games such as Bin Weevils were actually breaching the ASA's advertising standards in the way that it promoted paid subscriptions to the players. The way they were doing this was directly asking children to pay for membership, with things like become a member and join now in all capitals, and then it would be really difficult to click off it. They put like a little tiny X, and they basically use the tactic of, oh, only the cool kids have this, and making the people who didn't have it or the children who didn't have it feel left out. It was basically just inappropriate to advertise to children that way, and to make them feel substandard if they didn't have membership. They were warned by the ASA about this, and when they failed to comply and take action, the ASA basically added them to a list of companies that were non-compliant. When ASA adds a company to the non-compliant list, it gives them the authority to stop them from using Google Ads, so Moshi Monsters would stop appearing at the top of the searches, and the ASA also then had the authority to inform news outlets and run campaigns of making parents aware of their transgressions. This remained the case until Mind Candy took action and altered the way their game was running, but Mind Candy said that they were stifled by regulation and that they needed to make money. And I can understand how challenging it must be, especially when you're failing and you're not making enough money, especially if 40% of your revenue comes from subscription services, but you're making a loss and no one's subscribing. You're trying to get people to subscribe, and the only way to do that is to advertise the membership, but you're not allowed to do that in an extreme way. It's kind of a double-edged sword. You're not really sure. They were kind of in a rut. It was reported in 2015 that their membership revenue had halved, going from 5.7 million to 2.8 million. In 2016 they were really struggling. Obviously they had to pay back their loan, but they were negotiating with the loan provider on pushing the loan back. Mind Candy actually stated to the press that they were going to go bust if they couldn't convince the loan provider to push the loan back and if they couldn't get investment. They stated that in the event that the negotiations are not successful or the company cannot generate sufficient revenues, then the company would be unable to continue with the current finances. They reported that they lost over £10.9 million in 2015, which was actually an improvement from 2014's losses, but still quite a lot of money to be losing. And they had tried to replicate Moshi Monsters' initial success by releasing other games on the App Store, which kind of all had middling success, but not enough to launch them back into stardom. It was also at this point that their licensing deals dwindled significantly and they were having a steep decline in sales of their licensed products. In 2016, Michael Acton Smith released the app Calm. He was still working for Mind Candy, but he was talking about how much he loved relaxation and how he got rid of all his stress.
And I would be stressed too if I was losing £10 million a year, yes.
But yes, he released Calm, which was basically a meditation website. And he said he was actually really interested in combining meditation with children's entertainment. So that kind of gave us a hint to what his future interests would be and what Moshi Monsters would eventually become. They actually managed to decrease their losses significantly from the £10.9 million to £6.4 million in 2016, and they had successfully managed to get some investment and raise some funds. They then launched an app for 6 to 8 year olds called Moshi Monster Egg Hunt, which was basically a very childlike app game where you're collecting the moshlings and it's like a hunt. And they also released a series of toys and licensed products for this, which were relatively successful. In 2017, Moshi Monsters had successfully raised £760,000 to keep them from running out of cash. In their own words, they were running out of cash. They stated that they would still likely need more funding in the first quarter of 2018. Due to years of having losses, although these losses were decreasing, they were having consistent, significant losses in revenue. They had to cut their staffing quite significantly. They went from 98 staff members to 22. It was actually during this year that Michael Acton Smith's dream vision came to life, and that came to be with Moshi Twilight, which was basically a combination of Calm for adults and Moshi Monsters. And it was basically a storytelling app, so the goal of it was that it was calm, relaxing stories, songs, videos for children, and instead of reading them a story yourself, you'd give them the phone and they'd listen to these half-hour, 20-minute stories. They were supposed to put them to sleep and it was supposed to be good for them. Obviously, like, there is some science behind it, but also there's a lot of science written about looking at screens is quite bad for you, using a phone is bad for you before bed, like, it's argumentative. But basically it was a subscription service that parents could use for their children to help them at bedtime. This was actually quite successful, especially considering it was subscription based and paid only. They managed to decrease their losses from 6 million to 1.8 million, which is quite a significant decrease in loss. However, their revenue overall was 3.6 million, and comparative to the 46 million they made in 2012, they weren't making that much money anymore. Moshi Twilight was definitely starting to keep them afloat and starting to decrease their losses. They had over 100,000 people on Android phones download the app in that year, and even more on the iPhone, and it cost £24.99 a month. So it was quite expensive actually. It still is quite expensive, but if people were paying for it and that many people were doing it, it was a very effective way to cut their losses. In 2018, they managed to raise £3.8 million from their existing investors. And in 2019, they also managed to get £2.8 million from their investors because they'd started to enroll famous names into their app to read the stories for them, such as Brian Blessed. And these famous names coming on board to read the stories actually led to their sales doubling. Their revenue grew from 5.2 million to 5.7 million from 2018 and 2019, which is a significant growth from the 3 million they were making before. However, this was the year of the death of the original web browser Moshi Monsters, which is sad. Obviously, Flash was no longer going to be functional after a certain point because Adobe were no longer going to support it. And the original Moshi Monsters was based on a Flash game. As the company had already suggested in their previous years, they'd only be able to keep the Moshi Monsters game running and develop it on a new software if it was financially viable. And by this point, Moshi Monsters was no longer their main source of income as a game. The Moshi brand was pretty dead. They actually put out an announcement that the game would be shutting down on the 13th of December 2019 at midday for good, and it would never be back. They had no intention of redeveloping it on a different software. They did say that despite no longer having any intentions of opening Moshi Monsters, the original game, ever again, they were going to keep Moshi Monsters Egg Hunt as the app running, and they were going to continue to develop Moshi Twilight. Obviously, these two were now the two most profitable sources of income for them, as they were based on the iPhone and the smartphone, etc. They stated themselves that it was not a realistic or sensible business decision to recreate the game on a different platform. So what now?
I'm an 18-year-old crying about a childhood game. Oh, this is so sad.
Moshi Monsters, the original website, is now defunct as of 2021, and Moshi Monsters lives on pretty much solely off the Moshi Twilight app, now known as just Moshi or Moshi Kids, and Moshi Monsters Egg Hunt still exists, and they still make very annoying toys for it. It was actually kind of bad for them. In 2019, their losses begin to rise again, and I'm unsure why, but I guess they were probably still bringing in some income from the Moshi Monsters original game, and they'd completely cut off that source of income, and they said that they were spending most of their time focusing on developing Moshi Twilight, which might have led to lack of development on Moshi Monsters Egg Hunt, which again would then lead to a lack of subscriptions, lack of toys being bought, and then increased losses. The most recent figures I could find were actually in January 2021, so pretty recently, and they said that they had 160,000 paying members for Moshi. The sleeping app. They'd set out a timeline and they'd said that Moshi Twilight was going to be so successful that they'd double their revenue and they'd be at £10 million of revenue by now, which has not happened. It is definitely a middling success rather than the huge success they thought it would be. Because their success was not as so groundbreaking as they thought it would be, their losses actually steadily increased over the period of 2019 to where we are today, to 6.1 million. And they'd managed to get it down quite significantly, but it was now back up to where it was a couple of years before then. They did manage to raise £8.7 million in investment in 2020, but they still have the really large loan of £9.7 million to pay back. It's due to be repaid by June 2020. Whether or not that will happen is another question. I kind of get the impression that they might need to ask for another extension on their loan, or they might have to declare bankruptcy, because they are continuing to make losses as time goes on, and I am surprised that they are continuing to get investment. There have been no talks of developing new Moshi Monsters games or anything on that brand anymore. I guess they were kind of running on fumes. I was surprised to find that there was still a player base for Moshi Monsters by the time the game closed. I think most of them are adults who played it originally as children, so it's primarily a nostalgia thing for them. But because there was a small fan base of people who still liked the nostalgia of the Moshi Monsters game, there's actually a group of developers who I believe are doing it in their free time that are creating a game called Moshi Monsters Rewritten, which is the original game but recreated in another software that isn't Flash. So they've basically put up this free-to-play version of the Moshi Monsters with the membership perks included for free, but in a different software, so people can still access the game. I actually went on their Discord. They do have a Discord, and it seems quite widely populated, but it is definitely a very niche community, so much smaller than what I would say is on things like Habbo Hotel at the moment. But basically, it sounds like it's a passion project, something they're enjoying working on. All of the features are not yet available, but it's pretty close, so if you're looking for a nostalgia trip, I'd recommend hopping on there. I guess if we are comparing the Moshi Monsters train to Habbo, it's quite clear that they were making not enough money to warrant keeping the doors open on the original web browser game, compared to the fact that Habbo have continued to keep their game up and running even though they've had to redevelop it in Unity. I feel like the difference is that even though Habbo is a teenagers' children game, the people who return as adults don't find it too jarringly childlike, whereas Moshi Monsters is definitely more children's focused. As far as I can tell, Moshi Monsters' social medias have all stopped being functional pretty much. The Facebook has stopped posting anything since the original Moshi Monsters was shut down. The Twitter has not posted anything of their own. And they didn't comment on anything for a year, and then suddenly at the beginning of 2021 they started responding to tweets, but mostly it's just them going, no, we're not bringing it back. I will be interested to see what or if Mind Candy releases anything next. I'm unsure if they're going to be able to survive just on Moshi Twilight or Moshi Kids on its own, or Moshi Egg Hunt. I almost feel like if they want Mind Candy to continue as a company, they might have to develop a new game entirely. But I would be interested to see what kind of things happen for them in the near future. I can only speculate because obviously I don't work for Mind Candy, but what do I think killed them off? I actually think that despite the massive commercial success they had, they failed to adapt to the market as it developed. Yes, children were really into web browser games in the period that they existed, which meant that the 8 to 12-year-olds they initially targeted were very excited by this game. But as those children grew up, they failed to adapt to the new needs of the new children who were 8 to 12. They didn't develop the mobile app in time. They didn't swap over their advertisement to being on the phones and advertising on apps. I think not developing the game as an app around that transitional period was a mistake. I just think that might be an issue with the market for young children in general, because things become quite dated very quickly. Because children grow up so quickly and their interests change so quickly, you have to constantly be revitalising your market and your audience and trying to get new people involved, because the loyalty of your audience and your market is not steady and it's not easy to maintain. And I think that is what killed off Moshi Monsters. I think that they perhaps needed to alter the game or do a new ad campaign every single time there was a new cycle of children, basically. Although I feel like this video is probably less interesting to those who are more interested in the tea or the drama that has been in my previous videos, I am really interested in what makes companies fail. I like to look at those kind of things that are nostalgic to people of my age, to you and me probably, and exploring what happened to them. Like, ever since I was a kid, I played that game when it was popular, but I haven't thought about it since then, and now it's interesting to re-explore what kind of kicked it in the bucket, why it kicked the bucket. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you play Moshi Monsters? Have you tried the new Moshi Monsters that's fan-made? I'd also love to hear what you'd like me to talk about next if you have any ideas. So feel free to hit subscribe if you want to watch more videos, and I have a Patreon. Yeah. Thanks for watching.
I'm the bad guy, make your mama sad guy, make your girlfriend mad tight, make your my seducer dad type. Yeah, I'm the bad guy, duh.